Testing 1, 2, 3. Hey guys, how's it going? Is my mic good? We want a loud mic. Loud mic. Mic louder. Let me make sure. So I'm going to read a book. I do this for no money and no reason. Um, just to have conversation about interesting topics. That is the plan. Today we will talk about super interesting topics. Interesting ideas by Zygmunt Bauman. Zygmunt Bauman is uh, he's a sociologist, and I've been reading his books for a long time. He's given me some cool ideas, and maybe you'll like them too. Let's enjoy it together. So, what do you want to hear about? I have a responsibility for our neighbors, and I have critique, privatized and disarmed, the uses of poverty, progress, the same and different, education, under, for, and in spite of postmodernity, identity in the globalizing world, my favorite subjects, faith and instant gratification. That sounds interesting. Does love need reason? Big question mark. Private morality in an immoral world. Democracy on two battlefronts. Violence old and new. On postmodern uses of sex. Steamy. Is there life after immortality? I don't know. There are too many good things to pick from. I really want some help making a decision. How are you feeling, by the way? Everybody not sick? Because that would be good. Okay, super cool. It's a framed picture of my parents. Okay. I really like identity in the globalizing world. Education's interesting. Uses of poverty sounds pretty damn cool. Yeah, I like that. The Jean-Jacques Rousseau in me really loves talking about poverty and inequality. You know Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He's this guy. Discourse on inequality. I got this from the Louvre in Paris. It was on a trip. And, I've always been a big fan of him and his hat. I think I'm actually going to wear a hat like that. Be right back. Where's my hat? My Jean-Jacques Rousseau hat. It's probably buried on my bed. Is it? It's not. Huh. Well, I am flummoxed. Call me there we go. Should have known. It's right there in arm's reach. Okay, so Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote that thing everybody's been quoting ad hoc lately, where they say the social contract. The social contract was a Rousseauan idea. The idea that we live in a society, right? We pay taxes, right? So we do that on the assumption that the government will treat us well and allow us to have better lives. And if they don't let us have better lives, then what's the fucking point of it? So that's him. Jean-Jacques Rousseau said that. Zygmunt Bauman is a lot newer than Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He's like an old Frenchman. He's very dead, very old, very French. Zygmunt Bauman, I don't remember where he's from. He has a really cool accent. But anyway, The Uses of Poverty by Zygmunt Bauman from the Individualized Society. The main theme in this book is that we live in a world where everybody is individually responsible for their own failures, basically. That we are told by everything we look at that anything bad that happens to us is our fault, and that coming together collectively to take on groups that are in power is useless, because there's nobody around us we have anything in common with. That probably sounds kind of Marxist, but anyway, so let's just listen to Zygmunt. Uses of poverty. Freed from political reins and local constraints, the fast globalizing and increasingly extraterritorial economy is known to produce the ever deepening wealth and income gaps between the better off and the worse off sections of the world population, and inside every single society, but also economically rational and socially useful work, and so made economically and socially redundant. According to the most recent report of the United Nations Development Program, while the global consumption of goods and services was twice as big in 1997 as in 1975 and had multiplied by a factor of 6 since 1950, 1 billion people cannot satisfy even their elementary needs. 1 billion people can't. Among 4.5 billion of the residents of the developing countries, 3 in every 5 are deprived of access to basic infrastructures. A third have no access to drinkable water. A quarter have no accommodation worthy of the name accommodation, and a fifth have no use of sanitary and medical services. Some of them, okay, he's talking about developing countries, but side note, The Guardian, a British newspaper, has discovered some situations like that in mountain ranges and rural parts of America also. So, yeah, this is getting mad serious. Um, 1 in 5 children spend less than 5 years in any form of schooling. A similar proportion is permanently undernourished. In 70 to 80 of the 100 or so developing countries, the average income per head of population is today lower than 10 or even 30 years ago. In the world, in the homeland of the world's wealthiest people, 16.5% of the population live in poverty. 1/5 of adult men and women can neither read nor write, while 13% have a life expectancy shorter than 60 years. On the other hand, the 3 richest men on the globe have private assets bigger than the combined national product of the 48 poorest countries. The fortune of the 15 richest persons exceeds the total product of the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. According to the report, less than 4% of the personal wealth of the 225 richest people would suffice to offer all the poor of the world access to elementary medical and educational amenities, as well as adequate nutrition. And I don't think it was in peanut butter. I think by nutrition they mean nutrition. By the way, did you know peanut butter was like the biggest famine food in Africa? That's food relief banks distribute peanut butter and obviously rice. It's like, and honestly, I find that to be I find that to be the most economical thing to live on anywhere on the planet. Anyway, the effects of growing it's not to most people's taste. I don't know. The effects of growing international and intra-societal polarization of wealth, income, and life chances, this undoubtedly most worrying of contemporary tendencies, have been and are widely studied and discussed, though little, except for a few ad hoc fragmentary and irresolute measures, has been undertaken to roll back these effects, let alone to arrest the tendency. The ongoing story of concern and inaction has been told and retold many times over, with no visible benefit so far. It is not my intention to repeat the story again, but to question the cognitive frame and the value set in which it is, as a rule, contained. A frame and a set which are a bar to the full comprehension of the gravity of the situation, and so also to to the search for its feasible alternatives. The cognitive frame in which the discussion of growing poverty is commonly placed is purely economic, and the dominant sense of economy is primarily the aggregate of money mediated transactions, that of the distribution of wealth and income, and access to paid employment. The value set which informs the choice of relevant data and their interpretation is most often that of pity, compassion, and solicitude for the lot of the poor. Oh. Occasionally, um, concern with the safety of social order is also expressed, though. Rightly, seldom in full voice, since few sober minds would sense in the plight of the contemporary poor and destitute a tangible threat of rebellion. Neither the cognitive set nor the value set are wrong in themselves, but more precisely, they are wrong not in what they focus on, but in what they gloss over in silence and leave out of sight. And the facts they suppress are the role played by the new poor in the reproduction and reinforcement of the kind of global order which is the cause of their destitution, but also of the ambient fear making the life of all the rest miserable, and the extent to which the global order depends on that destitution and that ambient fear for its own self perpetuation. Karl Marx said once, in the times of the up and coming, savage, and as yet untamed capitalism, still too illiterate to decipher the writings on the wall, that the workers cannot liberate themselves without liberating the rest of society. It could be said now, in the times of capitalism triumphant, with no more heedings of the writings on the wall, or the walls themselves for that matter, that the rest of human society cannot be liberated from its ambient fear and impotence unless its poorest part is liberated from its penury. To put it in a nutshell, the presence of the large army of the poor and the widely publicized egregiousness of their condition are a countervailing factor of great, crucial importance to the existing order. Its importance lies in an offsetting of the otherwise repelling and revolting effects of the consumer's life lived in the shadow of perpetual uncertainty. The more destitute and dehumanized the poor of the world, and the poor in the next street are shown and seen to be, the better they play that role in the drama which they did not write and did not audition for. Once upon a time, people were induced to meekly endure their lot, however harsh it might have been, by being shown vividly painted pictures of hell, ready to ingest everyone guilty of rebellion. Like all other things otherworldly and eternal, the netherworld, meant to achieve a similar effect, has now been brought to earth, placed firmly within the confines of earthly life, and presented in a form ready for instant consumption. The poor are today the collective other of the frightened consumers. They are now the others who, much more tangibly and with more conviction than those of Sartre's In Camera, are fully and truly their hell. In one vital respect, the poor are what the non-poor rest of the world would dearly like to be, though would not dare to try. They're free from uncertainty. But the certainty they got in exchange comes in the shape of disease, crime, and drug-infested mean streets, if they happen to live in Washington, D.C., or a slow death of malnutrition, if they inhabit the Sudan. The lesson one learns when hearing about the poor is that certainty is most certainly to be feared more than the detested uncertainty, and that the punishment for rebellion against the discomforts of daily uncertainty is swift and merciless. The sight of the poor keeps the non-poor at bay and in step. It thereby perpetuates their life of uncertainty. It prompts them to tolerate or bear resignedly the unstoppable flexibilization of the world and growing precariousness of their condition. The sight incarcerates their imagination and shackles their arms. They do not dare to imagine a different world. They are much too chary to try to change this one. And as long as this is the case, the chances of an autonomous, self-constituting society of democratic republican citizenship are, to say the least, slim and dim. This is a good enough reason for the political economy of uncertainty to include, as one of its indispensable ingredients, the casting of the problem of the poor, as alternatively the issue of law and order, or the object of humanitarian concern, but nothing else and no more than that. When the first representation is used, the population can the popular condemnation of the poor, depraved rather than deprived, comes as close as conceivable to the burnings of popular fear and effigy. When the second representation is developed, the wrath against the cruelty and callousness of the vagaries of fate can be safely channeled into innocuous carnivals of charity, and the shame of impassivity can be evaporated in short lived explosions of human solidarity. Day by day, though, the world poor and the country poor do their silent work in undermining the confidence and resolution of all those still in work and on regular incomes. The link between the poverty of the poor and the surrender of the non poor has nothing irrational about it. The sight of the destitute is a timely reminder to all sober and sensible beings that even the prosperous life is insecure, and that today's success is not a guarantee against tomorrow's fall. There is a well-founded feeling that the world is increasingly overcrowded, that the sole choice open to the governments of countries is, at best, one between widespread poverty with high unemployment, as in most European countries, and widespread poverty with a little less unemployment, as in the USA. Scholarly research confirms the feeling. There is less and less paid work around. This time round, unemployment looks more sinister than ever before. It does not seem a product of a cyclical economic depression, no more a temporary condensation of misery to be dissipated and wiped out by the next economic boom. Politicians' promises to settle the issue by a return to work bear an uncanny similarity to Barry Goldwater's apocryphal response to the nuclear threat. Let us put the wagons in a circle. As Jean Paul Marechal argues, during the era of heavy industrialization, the need to construct huge industrial infrastructures and to build bulky machinery saw to it that more new jobs were regularly created than the old ones were destroyed as a result of the annihilation of traditional crafts and skills. But this is evidently no longer the case. Until the 1970s, the relationship between the growth of productivity and the level of unemployment was still positive. Since then, the relation grows more negative by the year. An important threshold seems to have been crossed in the 70s. Recent figures speak volumes about the reasons to feel insecure in even the most stable and regular of jobs. The shrinking volume of employment is not, though, the sole reason to feel insecure. Such jobs as are still to be had are no longer fortified against the unpredictable hazards of the future. Work is today, one may say, a daily rehearsal of redundancy. The political economy of insecurity has seen to it that the orthodox defenses have been dismantled, and the troops manning them have been dismantled too. Labor has become flexible, which in unadorned speech means that it is easy now for the employer to fire people at will and without compensation, and and that solidarity and effective trade union action in defense of the wrongly dismissed looks increasingly like a pipe dream. Flexibility means as well the denial of security. The growing number of available jobs are part time or fixed term. Most contracts are rolling or renewable at intervals frequent enough to prevent the right to relative stability from acquiring force. Flexibility means also that the old life strategy of investing time and effort in specialist skills in the hope of a steady inflow of interests makes ever less sense, and so that once most common rational choice of people wishing for the life of security is no longer available. Livelihood, that rock on which all life projects and aspirations must rest to be feasible. To make sense and to muster energy, they need to be fulfilled, or at least half a go at being fulfilled, has become wobbly, erratic, and unreliable. What the advocates of welfare to work programs leave out of account is that the function of livelihood is not just to provide day to day sustenance for the employees and the dependents, but, no less importantly, to offer the existential security without which neither freedom nor the will to self assertion are conceivable, and which is the starting point of all autonomy. Work in its present shape cannot offer such security even if it manages time and again to cover the costs of staying alive. The road from welfare to work leads from security to insecurity, or from lesser to greater insecurity. That road being what it is, prompting as many people as possible to take it chimes well with the principles of the political economy of insecurity. The political economy of uncertainty is the set of rules to end all rules imposed on local political authorities by extraterritorial financial, capital, and trade powers. Its principles have found full expression in the ill-famed multilateral agreement on investment and the constraints it imposed on the government's freedom to constrain capital's freedom of movement, as well as in the clandestine way in which it was negotiated and the secrecy in which it was kept by common consent of political and economic powers until discovered and brought to light by a group of investigative journalists. The principles are simple, since they are mostly negative. They are not meant to establish a new order, only to take apart the existing ones, and to prevent the state governments of the day from replacing the dismantled regulations with new ones. The political economy of uncertainty boils down essentially to the prohibition of politically established and guaranteed rules and regulations, and the disarming of the defensive institutions and associations which used to stand in the way of capital and finance becoming truly sans frontiers, without borders. The overall outcome of both measures is the state of permanent and ubiquitous uncertainty, which is to replace the rule of coercive law and legitimize and as the grounds for obedience, or rather warranty for the lack of resistance to the new, this time suprastate and global powers. The political economy of uncertainty is good for business. It makes the orthodox, bulky, unwieldy, and costly instruments of discipline redundant, replacing them not so much with the self-control of trained, drilled, and disciplined objects, as with the inability of privatized and endemically insecure individuals to act in any concerted way. The kind of inability which is made all the more profound by their disbelief that any such action might be effective, and that private grievances might be recast into collective problems, let alone into the shared projects of an alternative order of things. As far as eliciting the passive submission to the rules of the game, or to a game without rules, is concerned, endemic uncertainty from the bottom to the top of the social ladder is a neat and cheap yet highly effective substitution for normative regulation, censorship, and surveillance. Apart from the margins of the excluded and redundant, who are much too certain of their exclusion and redundancy to be receptive to the policies of uncertainty, panopticons in either the old and heavy or the updated high-tech and lightweight versions are not necessary. Freedom alone, in its consumer market rendition and under the conditions of market-sustained precariousness, can be relied on completely to elicit all human conduct needed to keep the global economy going. The truly potent powers of today are essentially extraterritorial, while the sites of political action remain local, and so the action is unable to reach the quarters where the limits of sovereignty are drawn, and the essential premises of political endeavors are by design and by default decided. This separation of power from politics is often referred to under the name of globalization. As I've pointed out elsewhere, the term globalization has settled in the current discourse in the place occupied throughout the modern era by the term universalization. And it did so mainly because globalization refers to what is happening to us, rather than like universalization did to what we need or ought or intend to do. Globalization signals a naturalization of sorts of the course that world affairs are taking. They're staying essentially out of bounds and out of control, acquiring a quasi-elemental, unplanned, unanticipated, spontaneous, and contingent character. Just as the user of the World Wide Web can only select from the choices on offer, can hardly influence the rules by which the internet operates or expand the range of choices available under these rules, so the individual nation states cast in the globalized environment have to play the game by its rules, or risk severe retribution, or at best total ineffectiveness for their undertakings if the rules are ignored. Once the powers that preside over the growing flexibility of life situations, and so the ever more profound uncertainty saturating the whole course of human lives, have become de facto global, or at least suprastates, which means above all the states. The preliminary condition of an effective action aimed at mitigating the level of the first two elements of the triad of insecurity, uncertainty, and safety is raising politics to the level that is as genuinely international as that on which the present day powers operate. Politics must catch up with power, which has cut itself free to roam in the politically uncontrolled space, And for that purpose, it must develop instruments allowing it to reach the spaces through which those powers flow. To deploy Manuel Castell's term. Manuel Castell's is great also, by the way. Nothing less is needed than an international republican institution on a scale commensurate with the scale of operation of the transnational powers. Or, as Elaine Grush put it recently in an article commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Communist Manifesto, what is needed is a new internationalism. There are few signs to suggest that anything like a new international spirit is indeed emerging. The outbursts of supranational solidarity are notoriously carnival-like, sporadic, and short-lived. The media coined the telling-it-all term the aid fatigue to denote the persistent tendency of international solidarity to wear off and evaporate in a matter of days rather than weeks. As Gresh points out, Bosnia was not a late 20th century replay of the Spanish War, while in the face of the ongoing wars of attrition in Algeria and dozens of other gory civil wars or government-orchestrated massacres of aliens, unwelcome tribal or ethnic minorities and infidels, only half-hearted noises are made in conference rooms, but virtually no action is taken on the ground. There are noble exceptions like Amnesty International or Greenpeace, but on the whole, the few idealist efforts to break through the wall of indifference muster at best a token or perfunctory support from some state governments, but subterranean or overt hostility from quite a few others, and virtually no popular movement to back the attitude they selflessly promote and exemplify. The activists of Medicines Frontiers, that's Doctors Without Borders, have bitterly complained that their initiative, cast by the media as humanitarian action, has been cynically exploited by the powers that be to justify their own inactivity in, for instance, Bosnia or Rwanda, and to clear by proxy the consciences of their subjects. The need for global agencies powerful enough to match the condensed strength of global markets and finance capital is beyond doubt. A moot question, though, is whether the extant political institutions, state governments, and state-bound political parties can transform themselves into or generate through negotiation agencies of such a type. It is a moot question since the governments and the parties are necessarily homeward-looking and bound to remain local. Perhaps the associations unbound by such limitations, able to acquire a truly across-the-boundaries character and focus their action on what most pains most of the people most of the time, have better prospects. They stand little chance, though, without the notion of the common good, striking its roots in the collectively guaranteed security of the would-be political actors. Utopia, after all, as Victor Hugo once said, is tomorrow's truth. Thank you guys. Comment below and let me know if you have thoughts you want to talk about.